Welcome back to The Explainer. So we're actually skipping the usual agenda today because we're diving straight into a really intense historical and ethical analysis. We're looking at a frankly terrifying sociological phenomenon. What exactly happens when society's rules just completely fall apart? Today, we are exploring the absolute breaking point of the social contract.
Okay, let's dive into this. It's a pretty chilling reality to think about, right? What happens when the justice system completely fails to protect you? We all kind of operate under this assumption that if we're wronged, the law is going to be there to have our backs. But when that perceived absence of protection becomes the everyday reality, when regular citizens feel totally abandoned by the state, well, human behavior takes a dark turn. We're going to impartially look at the historical data to see exactly how this plays out.
Which brings us to a foundational theory from Sir William Blackstone. He's widely considered the father of American law. He actually wrote that self-help becomes an option when society's laws are found insufficient to restrain the violence of oppression. So today, we're using 3 extreme historical cases from our sources to show exactly how this legal impotence drives ordinary citizens and even sworn lawmen toward violent retribution. It essentially transforms victims into judge, jury, and executioner.
Section 1. The Town That Kept Quiet. Skidmore, Missouri, 1981.
This rural farming community was literally terrorized by a single, untouchable bully named Ken Rex McElroy. The list of offenses here is staggering. Over 2 decades, this guy was accused of 21 felonies. And we're talking severe crimes: assault, statutory rape, arson. But here's the crazy part. Out of those 21 arrests, he escaped conviction 20 times. No way, right? How does that happen? Well, he figured out the system. He'd intimidate witnesses by parking his truck outside their homes and just staring at them. And when he didn't like what a local judge was doing, he literally burned down the judge's barn. It is just an absolute colossal failure of the criminal justice system to stop a known threat.
The tension in Skidmore finally snapped after this terrifying sequence of events. McElroy shot a 70-year-old local grocer, Bo Bowenkamp, right in the neck over a piece of candy. McElroy was actually convicted of second-degree assault for it, but then the system failed the town yet again. The court released him on bond pending his appeal. Almost immediately, he's back out there, breaking his bond with a weapon. Witnesses bravely signed an affidavit to report it, but the bond hearing just kept getting delayed. That decision, releasing a violent, convicted man back into the community, completely severed the town's remaining trust in the law.
So the crucial point is what happened on the morning of that delayed hearing. McElroy drove into town, hit up a local bar, and then got into his truck. And right there, in broad daylight, someone shot him in the head. Here's the kicker. There were 45 people present. 45 witnesses on the street that day. And when authorities investigated, every single one of those 45 people claimed they saw absolutely nothing. They acted as this collective vigilante shield, choosing silence over a justice system that had completely abandoned them.
Case number 2. The Lawman's Lethal Posse. The Earp Vendetta Ride, 1882. Let's shift gears to the American Old West, where that perceived absence of protection drove a sworn lawman to take brutal matters into his own hands. The chronological escalation here is super important. After the famous gunfight at the OK Corral, the Cochise County Cowboys wanted revenge. In December 1881, Virgil Earp was maimed in an ambush. By January, his brother Wyatt Earp was federally deputized as a U.S. Marshal. But local law enforcement was heavily compromised, and the violence just kept coming. On March 18, 1882, Morgan Earp was assassinated. Faced with a totally failing local system, Wyatt Earp assembled a federal posse, including the famous Doc Holliday, and the very next day they set out to hunt down the outlaws.
This posse was lethal, and they were efficient. Over the next few weeks, they tracked their targets relentlessly. First, Frank Stillwell, shot right near the Tucson train depot. Then they pursued Florentino Indian Charlie Cruz and killed him while he was trying to flee. Days later, they ambushed and killed Curly Bill Brocious in a massive shootout at Iron Springs. Now, impartially speaking, contemporary inquests verified that Earp's group killed these men without ever bringing them to trial.
And this brilliantly illustrates the historical debate that's still raging today. Was this a legitimate enforcement of the law, or was it a rogue vigilante death squad? On one hand, you have proponents arguing Wyatt Earp had federal authorization, held warrants, and framed these shootings as self-defense. But on the flip side, critics point out the Earps completely bypassed due process, used non-deputized gunmen, and were fundamentally driven by personal revenge. The lines between official duty and vigilantism were totally blurred by a broken local system.
All right, case number 3, the grieving citizens rampage, Duckfoot Chico in Sao Paulo, 1984.
Our third and honestly most tragic source narrative takes us to Brazil. It focuses on an ordinary construction worker and bar owner named Francisco Vital da Silva. Francisco's life was completely shattered when criminals destroyed his bar and violently assaulted his family while he was away. He did exactly what you're supposed to do, right? He went to the authorities. He provided detailed descriptions. He filed the reports. But, as our sources highlight, the authorities just coldly ignored him. He was met with total indifference. The police literally did nothing.
Failed entirely by the state, the man known as Francisco practically died, and a terrifying avenger took his place. He became known locally as Duckfoot Chico, driving the signature white Chevy Opala and teaming up with his 19-year-old son Flavio. He started hunting down the men who assaulted his family. And when that revenge was complete, he didn't stop. He figured the police had failed the city, so he was going to clean up the streets himself. In a single year, Duckfoot Chico mercilessly executed an estimated 50 criminals. 50.
But extra-legal violence is messy, it's chaotic, and it ultimately consumed him. In 1985, Chico was in a bar and mistakenly targeted an undercover cop. The officer drew a weapon thinking Chico was a robber, and Chico shot and killed him. Realizing this catastrophic mistake, he actually coordinated with a local radio DJ friend to safely surrender to the authorities. He was sentenced to 6 years in prison, but the violence just followed him inside. During a 1987 prison riot, he was stabbed 91 times. His whole crusade just ended in absolute devastation.
Section 4. The illusion of justice. Let's look at the true cost of a lawless society. Let's move to and see how this builds into the overarching theme of our explainer today. A silent town, a vengeful lawman, a grieving father. In Skidmore, it was the release of a violent felon and completely ignored witness intimidation. With Earp, local authorities were compromised while his family members were assassinated. For Duckfoot Chico, police ignored brutal assaults, leaving citizens unprotected. In every single one of these historic cases, the extreme vigilante justice wasn't random chaos. It was a direct, explosive response to governments failing their most fundamental duty to protect their people. It's legal impotence driving ordinary folks to violent retribution.
And we really can't look at this strictly as ancient history either. Sources from America's Quarterly warn us that this form of extra-legal justice is actually endemic in modern Brazil today. Endemic meaning it's just regularly found in the area. When people feel victimized and afraid, and the public security model fails, this kind of violence starts to look like a legitimate answer to a lot of folks.
To put that into a really chilling, modern perspective, sociologist José de Souza Martins reports that because of this broken security model, an average of 1 person is lynched per day in Brazil. Just think about that. 1 person, every single day, killed by mob rule because the social contract has just completely fractured.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that all our sources objectively agree. Vigilantism is not justice. It is an illusion. Torture and mob rule replace due process, and the risk of punishing innocent people is just incredibly high. Take the modern case of Juvenal Paulino de Souza. He was a truck driver, falsely accused and beaten to death by a mob, only to be found entirely innocent later on. This extrajudicial violence just perpetuates a chaotic cycle, and most importantly, it fundamentally fails to fix the broken justice system that caused all that fear in the first place.
Which leaves us with this final, vital question to ponder. When the absence of protection turns victims into executioners, it's pretty clear the system is broken. But if taking the law into our own hands only breeds more tragedy and chaos, how do we actually go about fixing the institutions that created that vacuum of justice in the first place? It's a massive challenge, but one we absolutely have to solve to keep our social contract intact. Thank you so much for hanging out with me for this explainer. I hope this sparked your curiosity, and I definitely encourage you to keep questioning the world around you.